The Cursed Doll, Part 1. When I first stumbled upon the doll, it was during one of my many weekend excursions to the local flea markets. My passion for antiquing often led me to hidden treasures, and I had a knack for uncovering the most peculiar items. That Saturday was no different. The market was bustling with its usual mix of vendors, their stalls overflowing with trinkets, vintage clothing, and oddities from bygone eras. I was meandering through, enjoying the sights and smells, when a particular stall caught my eye. It was tucked away in a corner, almost as if it was trying to remain unnoticed. The sign read, "Antique Curiosities." As I approached, an elderly woman with sharp, watchful eyes greeted me. Her gaze was intense, but her smile was warm. "Looking for something specific, dear?" she asked. "Just browsing," I replied, my eyes scanning the eclectic collection of items. There were old clocks, tarnished jewelry, and peculiar figurines. But what truly captured my attention was a doll sitting at the back of the stall. It was small, no more than a foot tall, and dressed in a faded Victorian-style dress. Its porcelain face was cracked in places, giving it an eerie, almost lifelike expression. Dark, glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I moved closer. "Ah, I see you found Lydia," the woman said, her voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "She's been in my family for generations. She's beautiful," I said, though the doll's presence was unnerving. "Is she for sale?" The woman's expression shifted slightly, a shadow of hesitation crossing her face. "I suppose she is, though I must warn you, Lydia has quite the history." Curiosity piqued, I pressed for details. The woman began to weave a tale that sounded like something out of a Gothic novel. Lydia, she explained, had been passed down through her family for over a century. Each owner had experienced strange, inexplicable events, unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and a pervasive sense of being watched. Some had even met with misfortune, though she was quick to dismiss any connection to the doll as mere superstition. Still, there was an undeniable aura of mystery around Lydia. Despite the foreboding story, I felt an inexplicable draw to the doll. Perhaps it was my love for the macabre, or maybe it was the thrill of owning something with such a storied past. Either way, I found myself purchasing Lydia and carefully placing her in my car for the journey home. That night, as I sat in my living room, I examined Lydia more closely. She was even more unsettling in the dim light, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames of the fireplace. I decided to place her on the mantel, thinking she would make an interesting conversation piece. As I retired to bed, a sense of unease settled over me. The house was unusually silent, the kind of silence that makes you acutely aware of every creak and groan of the structure. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of Lydia's unblinking eyes. At 3 a.m. I was jolted awake by a loud crash. My heart raced as I sat up, listening intently. The sound had come from downstairs. With a sense of trepidation, I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the stairs. The living room was in disarray. Books were scattered across the floor, and the painting that hung above the mantel was askew. But what sent a chill down my spine was the sight of Lydia. She had toppled from the mantel and lay face down on the floor, her dress splayed out around her. As I picked her up, I noticed her eyes seemed even more lifelike, filled with a sinister glint that hadn't been there before. A shiver ran through me, and for the first time I wondered if the old woman's warnings had been more than just superstition. Little did I know this was only the beginning. Lydia had found a new home, and with her, she brought an ancient, malevolent force that would soon turn my life into a waking nightmare. The Cursed Doll, Part 2. The next morning, I tried to shake off the lingering unease from the night before. The disarray in the living room could have been caused by anything. A draft, an unsteady mantle. But as I went about my day, the feeling of being watched persisted. I decided to take Lydia to an appraiser. Maybe learning more about her history would put my mind at ease. I contacted Mr. Jameson, a local expert in antique dolls, and arranged to meet him at his shop that afternoon. Mr. Jameson's shop was a quaint little place, filled with dolls from various eras. He greeted me with a warm smile and an air of genuine curiosity as I unwrapped Lydia from her protective covering. "Ah, a fine specimen," he remarked, adjusting his glasses and examining the doll closely. "Late 19th century, I presume. The craftsmanship is exquisite." "Can you tell me anything about her history?" I asked, hoping for something more concrete than the old woman's vague warnings. Mr. Jameson nodded, pulling out a magnifying glass to inspect Lydia's face. "This marking here," he pointed to a small symbol at the base of her neck, "indicates she was made by a very renowned, albeit mysterious, doll maker in Eastern Europe. His dolls were known to be unique." "Unique how?" I pressed, sensing he was holding something back. "Well," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There are legends, of course. Stories of his dolls being vessels for spirits. But such tales are common in our line of work. People love to attach supernatural significance to objects they don't fully understand." His words didn't exactly comfort me, but they did add another layer to Lydia's mystery. I thanked him and left the shop, feeling no closer to answers. That night, the atmosphere in my house was heavy. Lydia seemed to dominate the room, her presence more imposing than ever. I decided to store her in a box in the attic, hoping some distance would alleviate the tension. As I climbed the attic stairs, the air grew colder, the shadows darker. I found an old wooden chest and carefully placed Lydia inside, closing the lid with a sense of finality. Returning to the warmth of my living room, I tried to focus on other things, but sleep eluded me. The house felt different, as if it were holding its breath. Around midnight, the silence was broken by a faint rhythmic tapping. It sounded like it was coming from the attic. I told myself it was just the house settling, but the noise grew louder, more insistent. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and headed back up the stairs. The tapping stopped the moment I opened the attic door. I approached the chest, my hands trembling. As I lifted the lid, my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows. Lydia lay there, just as I had left her, but her position seemed slightly altered, as if she had shifted on her own. Suddenly, the attic light flickered on and off, plunging me into moments of darkness. In one of those brief flashes, I saw Lydia's head turn slightly, her eyes fixed directly on me. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the chest shut, bolting back downstairs. I locked the attic door, hoping to keep whatever malevolent force resided in Lydia confined. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. Lydia was not just a doll, she was a harbinger of something dark and ancient, and she wasn't going to let me go so easily. The Cursed Doll, Part 3. The following days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I avoided the attic, leaving Lydia locked away, but her presence seemed to seep through the walls. I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. Strange occurrences began to escalate. Lights flickered throughout the house. Electronics turned on and off by themselves, and cold spots appeared in random places. The unease I felt was palpable, an ever-present tension that gnawed at my sanity. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, the television in the living room suddenly blared to life, static filling the screen. I rushed to turn it off, but the remote was unresponsive. As I stood there staring at the chaotic display, a voice emerged from the static, a faint whispering chant that sent chills down my spine. Lydia, Lydia. My blood ran cold. I yanked the plug from the wall, and the television went dark. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the pounding of my heart. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I needed help. I decided to reach out to a friend of mine, Emma, who had a deep interest in the paranormal. We had often joked about her ghost hunting exploits, but now I found myself hoping her expertise could offer some explanation, or at least some comfort. When Emma arrived, she brought a plethora of equipment, EMF meters, cameras, and audio recorders. She took one look at my haggard appearance and knew I was serious. I led her to the attic, explaining everything that had happened since Lydia came into my possession. Emma set up her equipment, and we began our investigation. The air in the attic was thick with an oppressive energy. As Emma swept the room with her EMF meter, it spiked wildly near the chest where Lydia was stored. "We need to open it," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. With trepidation, I lifted the lid of the chest. Lydia lay there, as lifeless as ever, yet her eyes seemed to gleam with a hidden malevolence. Emma placed an audio recorder next to the doll and began to ask questions. "Who are you? Why are you here?" For a few moments, there was only silence. Then the temperature in the attic dropped sharply, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The EMF meter spiked again, and a low, guttural whisper filled the room. "Leave!" Emma's face paled. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "What do we do?" "We need to cleanse the house," she said, urgency in her voice. "This spirit is strong, and it's not going to leave willingly." Emma retrieved a bundle of sage from her bag and began to burn it, walking through the attic and chanting softly. The smoke filled the room, its pungent scent mingling with the cold air. As she moved, the oppressive energy seemed to waver, but Lydia's presence remained as strong as ever. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The air grew colder still, and the lights flickered before going out completely. In the darkness, Lydia's eyes seemed to glow with a sinister light. Emma's chanting grew louder, more desperate. "By the power of light, I banish you. Leave this place." A deafening roar filled the attic, shaking the very walls. Then, as quickly as it began, the noise ceased, and the lights flickered back on. The temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive energy lifted, but Lydia remained unchanged, her eyes still fixed on us. Emma looked at me, her face etched with fear and determination. "This isn't over. Whatever is attached to that doll is powerful. We need to find a way to break its hold before it destroys everything." As we left the attic, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Emma's help, perhaps we could rid ourselves of Lydia's curse. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and terror. Lydia was not just a doll. She was a conduit for something far darker, and she wasn't done with us yet. The Cursed Doll, Part 4. Days turned into weeks, and the malevolent force within Lydia showed no signs of relenting. Every attempt to cleanse the house seemed to anger it further. The strange occurrences grew more violent. Doors would slam with enough force to shake the walls. Objects were hurled across rooms, and at night I could hear whispers, cold, menacing voices calling my name. Emma and I had exhausted every conventional method. Desperation led us to seek out a more unconventional solution. Through a network of paranormal enthusiasts, we found ourselves connected with a reclusive exorcist known only as Father Matthias. He had a reputation for dealing with the most sinister of hauntings, and we hoped he would be our last best hope. Father Matthias arrived at my house one stormy evening, a figure cloaked in shadows and mystery. His presence was commanding, and despite the chill in the air, a sense of calm washed over me. He listened intently as Emma and I recounted the events that had plagued us since Lydia's arrival. "This spirit is ancient and malevolent," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "It has bound itself to the doll, feeding off the fear and chaos it creates. To break its hold, we must confront it directly." We gathered in the living room, where Lydia sat on the mantel once more. Father Matthias began to prepare, setting up candles and drawing symbols on the floor with chalk. He handed Emma and me each a rosary and instructed us to repeat prayers after him, no matter what happened. The exorcism began with Father Matthias chanting in Latin, his voice strong and unwavering. The air grew heavy, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. Darkness enveloped us, save for the faint glow from Lydia's eyes. The house groaned and shuddered as if protesting the ritual. Shadows danced along the walls, forming twisted, contorted shapes. The temperature plummeted, and a deep, guttural growl resonated from within the doll.
"Lydia, reveal yourself!"
Father Matthias commanded. The growling intensified, and Lydia's porcelain face began to crack further, dark lines spreading like a web. Her eyes seemed to bulge, and a black, oozing substance seeped from her mouth. The sight was horrifying, but we continued to pray, our voices trembling yet determined. Suddenly, the room erupted in chaos. Objects flew off shelves, and an invisible force knocked us to the ground. A deafening roar filled the air, and Lydia's body convulsed violently. Father Matthias stepped forward, his crucifix held high. "By the power of Christ, I command you to leave this vessel." With a final, ear-piercing scream, Lydia's body shattered into countless pieces, the malevolent energy within her dissipating like smoke. The room fell silent, the oppressive presence lifted. The candles flickered back to life, casting a warm, calming glow. Father Matthias knelt down, picking up the largest fragment of Lydia's face. "It is done," he said, his voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "The spirit is banished and the doll's power is broken." Emma and I hugged, tears of relief streaming down our faces. The nightmare was finally over. Father Matthias stayed with us until dawn, ensuring that no remnants of the dark force remained. In the light of the new day, I surveyed the remnants of Lydia. What had once been a symbol of terror now lay in pieces, devoid of any power. Emma and I decided to bury the fragments in a remote location, ensuring that no one would ever have to endure the horrors we had faced. Life slowly returned to normal, the house once again feeling like a home rather than a battleground. The memories of Lydia's curse lingered, but they no longer held the same fear. With the malevolent force vanquished, we found peace. The experience left me with a deep respect for the unseen forces that exist in the world. Lydia had been a harbinger of darkness, but through courage, determination, and faith, we had overcome her curse. The nightmare was over, and life at last could go on.